Well, good evening from the News Radio 1120 and 93.7 FM KPNW studios. I am Zero Jones, also known as Bill London. I do the wake-up call Monday through Friday morning, 6 a.m. to 9 on KPNW, where we stream at kpnw.com. And tonight's news is brought to you by none other than Rick Dancer Hair Products. That's right. Rick Dancer brings you the news because, well, he thinks you need to hear it. And there's a lot of it. I'll just tell you in advance that a lot of this tonight is going to deal with kids in one form or another, and also with President Trump's executive orders. So let's get into it. Now, the U.S. Department of Education opened an investigation this week into Portland Public Schools and the Oregon School Activities Associations allowing a male transgender student athlete to compete in an interscholastic girls track and field competition. Now, the department accuses Portland Public Schools and the Oregon School Athletic Association of violating Title IX. That prohibits same-sex or prohibits sex-based discrimination in any school or education-related program. Now, the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights alleges that PPS, Portland Public Schools, allowed the athlete to also use the girls' locker room. The McDaniel High School student athlete won the 200 and 400 meter races at a track and field meet March 19th, with critics saying her participation was unfair to other female competitors. She won the 200 meters by 1.5 seconds and the 400 meters by 10 seconds. Now, if you recall last year, this same male transgender student pretty much did the same thing at the state championships. It ticked off the girls and their parents then, and it's doing the same thing now. So, in a statement, PPS Superintendent Dr. Kimberly Armstrong says she's aware of the complaint. She says the district is fully cooperating, and she also says, "My commitment and our district's commitment is to do what's right for all students, especially those most vulnerable. It remains unwavering." Now, according to the president's executive order from several weeks ago, quote, "It shall be the policy of the United States to oppose male competitive participation in women's sports more broadly as a matter of safety, fairness, dignity, and truth." Now, in Oregon, the OSAA, the Oregon School Athletic Association, has a policy that allows, and I'll quote it directly, it allows students, quote, "to participate for the athletic or activity program of their consistently asserted gender identity while providing a fair and safe environment for all students." The policy says, once a transgender student has notified the school of their gender identity, the student, quote, "shall consistently be treated as that gender for the purposes of eligibility for athletics and activities." The OSAA received notice of the investigation, and their spokesman says they're talking with lawyers. And that's all they'll say. Craig Traynor, who is the acting assistant secretary for civil rights with the U.S. Department of Education, said that the Trump administration, quote, "will not allow the Portland Public School District or any other educational entity that receives federal funds to trample on the anti-discrimination protections that women and girls are guaranteed under law." Today, the U.S. Department of Education also revoked the waivers for California and Oregon colleges and universities that use federal funds to provide services to illegal aliens under the Performance Partnership Pilots for Disconnected Youth program. It's called P3 for short, and that's what I'll call it. The P3 program was meant for low-income and disadvantaged youths a path to and through post-secondary schools and to get an education in college or university. The Biden administration, however, approved a waiver allowing illegal aliens to receive the services. That's changed. The Department of Education says American taxpayer dollars will no longer be used to subsidize illegal immigrants through Department of Education programs. Now, like the first story, you can expect that this is going to court. Then you have this. So this is the Oregon legislature, and there's a bill to make class size a mandatory topic of labor bargaining and contract bargaining between Oregon school districts and their local teachers union. And it is definitely poised to clear a hurdle in Salem, probably this week, if not next, and that is a floor vote. Now, this makes sense because the teachers unions here in Oregon are one of the major, if not the biggest, financial supporter of Democratic candidates and legislators. So here's what proponents of this are claiming, that, well, you get better outcomes for high-need kids who need more specialized attention with smaller classes, and better outcomes for everybody because smaller classes are better for everybody, right? Well, let's discuss. So, absent the mandate to let unions actually decide class sizes because, well, if they don't like it, they'll go on strike. And, oh yeah, by the way, they'll get unemployment for it. Some districts have found a lower cost way to get around this one-size-fits-all approach to address the needs for smaller classes for high needs kids. And what they do is, right now, they offer bonus pay for teachers facing the heaviest class loads, and then reallocate staff to more high needs classrooms where they can have a fewer amount of kids. So this year's proposed $11.4 billion statewide record-breaking outlay for K through 12 schools over the next 2 years would give school districts enough money to maintain current service levels, but not add hundreds of new teachers or even keep as many as they have, given the fact that we have declining enrollment. Keep that point in mind. So that means that should the legislature pass House Bill 3652, school districts that agree to class size caps in negotiations, which they'll be forced to do, otherwise they'll strike, would be faced with cutting off school days to try and balance their budgets. So class sizes, and we're talking about enrollment, around Oregon have been dropping since before the pandemic as public school enrollments declined. In the 2023 through 2024 school year, the median class size was only 22.5 students, and there were 24,360 teachers statewide for about 523,000 students. According to data released last month by the Oregon Department of Education, that is. Looking at the same data, in 2018 through 19, the state's data showed the median class size was 25 kids, as opposed to 22.5, and there were 24,374 teachers statewide for 556,000 students. Now, under current Oregon law, districts are only required to negotiate class sizes if they receive federal Title I funding, which is meant specifically for high poverty schools. Now, teachers here in Oregon have packed the hearings testifying to the importance of smaller class sizes regardless of the students' demographics. But research has shown that reducing class sizes to small levels can make an impact in early elementary grades, particularly in high poverty populations. But it also shows that as kids get older, that impact diminishes and the strategy is not cost effective. It's much less cost effective than others, according to the research, like making sure there's a highly effective teacher actually in the classroom. So Why is this really even necessary? Well, here's an underlying thought. The unions want it because they know it's going to preserve their jobs. If you have fewer students, technically you should need fewer teachers, right? But if by force you reduce the number of kids in every classroom, you're still going to need more teachers in round numbers, hypothetically. If, say, you have this hypothetical school that has 30 kids in every classroom and one teacher in every classroom, and then all of a sudden you cap every classroom at 15 students, you're going to need more teachers, right? Now, real world, if the assumption is enrollment is going to continue to decline, which is the current trend, you make a law that contract negotiations must include discussions on class size caps, and that means unions just demand lower class size caps as enrollment declines. It's a great way to preserve your job. So, the U.S. Supreme Court has declined a petition that would revive the nearly 10-year-old case initially filed in Oregon by Eugene youth climate activists, all under 18, who struggled to get their federal case against the government to actually see a trial. That decision is the final death blow to the youth-led, or more appropriately, the adult-directed, legal battle initiated by 29 young people at the time, who sued the federal government in Eugene back in 2015. They claimed they had a constitutional right for a clean climate, and they wanted a judge or judges to order the United States to ban fossil fuels. Now, while the Eugene-initiated case is dead, let's say hi to the Oregon legislature, because it ain't over. Oregon Democratic legislators, radical environmentalists, and the usual out-of-state, deep, dark money types are trying to create an environmentalist Bill of Rights that would become a part of the state's constitution. So, if passed, envirotypes could control every aspect of your life through lawsuits because, well, that's not keeping the environment clean. It's a human right, like farming and using diesel tractors, like the car that you drive that they don't believe you should, completely controlling water rights in the state. All you have to do is use your imagination. Senator Jeff Goldman, Democrat from Ashland, one of Senate Joint Resolution 28's chief sponsors, and one of the state's most prolific good idea fairies, says we're losing sight of our stewardship responsibility to our children and their children. So, Oregon's Democratic legislators, who for years have turned their heads on the brutal abuse of kids in the state's care, and supported Oregon's Department of Justice, who have consistently fought in the courts against children who were demonstrably abused sexually and physically under the state's care, now claim they care. Democratic leadership announced this week they're going to hold oversight hearings, or at least an oversight hearing, to scrutinize the Oregon Youth Authority after revelations, which have been known for years and the subject of a number of lawsuits, that the agency has mishandled over 3,000 sexual and physical abuse complaints. We'll get to more of that in a second. Senator Anthony Broadman from Bend, a Democrat, says the Joint Ways and Means Subcommittee on Public Safety will hold hearings with the Senate Judiciary sometime later this session. Broadman says OYA's mission of protecting the public by pursuing the reformation of youth in a safe environment does not appear to have been accomplished. And this is unacceptable. Now, it needs to be mentioned that even after multiple Oregon Youth Authority staffers have been found guilty of sexual abuse of kids in their care, press surrounding 3,000 claims of uninvestigated child and physical abuse cases in the OYA, well, have gone uninvestigated, and the OYA director was fired by the governor. Other than that, it was crickets from the Democrats that control Oregon government. Until late last week, Republicans reached out to the U.S. Department of Justice calling for a federal investigation. And then this week, legislative leaders and the governor were falling all over themselves to appear as though all of a sudden now they're engaged and that they'll have a hearing sometime. And later on, sometime, the Secretary of State is going to do an audit. Now, the Oregonian broke the story after discovering documents that the state hadn't released that found the Youth Authority, which, by the way, has kids who've broken the law in their custody in corrections. They found that there were major problems. Constant sex crime allegations, drug smuggling, attempted suicides, and assaults that have been going on for decades and not investigated and never reported. This blew up last week. And it was an internal investigation, as I mentioned, that the Oregonian got their hands on and blew wide open. Now, I've got to say the report itself is utterly sickening, and it goes back over 40 years. Here's an example of one of the things that was in part of this report. There was a doctor, Dr. Edward Gary Edwards, who has since passed away, who routinely molested boys with ungloved hands in a practice that was so ubiquitous that he was actually known among the boys and the staff at Oregon's youth prison, McLaren, as Dr. Cold Fingers. Now, Dr. Cold Fingers would regularly fondle boys' genitals for things like having a sore throat and a variety of other things, and it is disgusting. And if you want to find it, go to the Oregonian. It was published on the 13th of this month, and it will make you absolutely sick. As a matter of fact, the correctional facility would actually, the overseers, would threaten kids who acted up, would threaten them by saying, "We're going to send you to see Dr. Cold Fingers if you don't shape up." Meaning the sexual abuse was known, and it was used as a threat, if not an actual punishment. This is how Oregon treats the kids under its care. All right, let's change the topic. An Oregon nonprofit that provides legal services to immigrants learned that its federal funding has been cut by the Trump administration. It was established back in 1978. It's called Immigration Counseling Service. It's Oregon's oldest independent nonprofit immigration law firm. It has offices in Hood River and Portland and does legal clinics all over the Willamette Valley and over in central and eastern Oregon. Immigration Counseling Service received notice last week of pretty much near termination of a federally funded program that provides legal representation to migrants, including illegals. Immigration Counseling Service was actually one of several nonprofits across the country that received funding from a larger nonprofit, Acacia Center for Justice, which had been a primary contractor for the government for a program that provided services and money to the organizations like Immigration Counseling Service. So they just lost $800,000. Apparently, they've talked to lawyers. Marion County Circuit Court Judge Thomas Hart issued a temporary injunction blocking a December executive order by Governor Tina Kotek that forced state agencies who were going to do large public projects to use only union shops for state construction projects. Well, the suit was brought against the governor and the state by Associated General Contractors of America and its member firms here in the state, who asked the judge Hart to put a stay on that order, which would have gone into effect next Monday. They asked Hart to block the order until a court could decide the merits of the lawsuit that AGC and its allies filed in February, which challenged the governor's authority to issue that executive order. Well, we've talked about this, and that has to do with the city of Eugene's controversial fire tax fee. It's a tax, but they called it a fee, and now it's going to be in the hands of voters. The city announced that, they verified more than 8,000 signatures of registered Eugene voters who signed the petition earlier this month to put that fee on a ballot. That's far more than they actually needed to collect. Now, the city says because of the timing of the certification, it's going to be on the November 4th ballot. The fee was passed by the city council, and it was to cover a nearly $11.5 million budget shortfall, putting in place an additional monthly forever fee/tax that would be on people's Eugene Water and Electric Board bills of roughly about $11 a month on the low end for homeowners, and on the low end, an extra $34 a month for business owners to partially cover Eugene Springfield's fire budget. Now, the fee tax could be, because of the way that it was structured, raised by the city anytime they wanted to raise it, and it would have diverted general fund money that typically would go to fire to other city expenditures. Now, they could have called this the library fee, the parks fee, the public works fee, anything they wanted, but they chose fire. The timing of the vote also comes at a really bad time for the city because the city's required to have a budget in place in early June. Now, the city council and, of course, the city manager could just rescind the whole fee tax thing, making it a moot issue. Then they'd have to move forward with cuts to city services. What are they going to do? Who knows? So, President Donald Trump signed an executive order this week aimed at election security. And as soon as I got the email about this, and I received the whole executive order because I'm on all of these government mailing lists, as soon as I looked at it, I went, oh God, the Secretary of State here in Oregon and Oregon's Democratic Congressional Caucus are going to lose their freaking minds. And they have. Now, according to the White House, essentially, among other things, the executive order would require proof of citizenship to register to vote, at least on federal votes, like, for instance, House of Representatives, Senate races, voting for the president. The order also would require all ballots to be received on Election Day and no later nationwide. Now, Oregon has its screwy mail-in vote system, which originally said, okay, the ballot has to be in on Election Day. And it doesn't make any difference. It has to be there, mailing it in or dropping it into a box. Then the Oregon legislature said, you know what? As long as there's a postmark by, say, November 4th, whatever election day falls on that particular year, as long as it's postmarked, that's okay, and the votes can continue to come in for at least another week. Well, that wouldn't work. And now, of course, if the law, or basically this executive order, says ballots have to be there on Election Day, that would mean for Oregon that the ballots would actually have to be in by sometime in later October to actually accommodate Oregon's screwy vote by mail system. And it would also cut federal funding to states that don't take reasonable steps to secure their election. Hi, Oregon. Now, remember the whole DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles, voter registration thing here in Oregon, where DMV found out, we've been registering a bunch of people who really aren't citizens. And when they found out, they waited a month before they told the Secretary of State or the governor. Okay, well, at that time, the Secretary of State of Oregon refused and still refuses to do a complete audit of Oregon's voter rolls, even after 1,600 non-U.S. citizens, both here legally and not, were registered to vote. The president says perhaps some people think I shouldn't be complaining because we won, but we got to straighten out our elections. The order directs state election officials to share their voter rolls with the federal government and prosecute voter fraud crimes. The president says more election actions are going to be coming in the following weeks. Oregon's Secretary of State, Tobias Reed, of course, was not happy, rebuking the order in a statement that read, "It is every American citizen's right to hold politicians accountable at the ballot box. This executive order is a threat to that right and a threat to our responsibility as a state to run fair, secure elections." They're going to challenge it in court. And I guess we'll end with this because, well, it's kind of interesting. So because a single Arco AM PM gas station in Woodburn does not post its gas prices on street signage, Oregon House Bill 3647 would require that they and every other one do. Now, admittedly, many already do. But it turns out, because of this one gas station, hundreds of complaints pour in annually to the state about this one station in Woodburn, which doesn't show a price. And 2 weeks ago, had regular at $6.70 a gallon. Here in the state right now, I think the last I checked was last week, we're at about $3.64 a gallon. And by the way, Woodburn is right off I-5. It is not out in the hinterlands, for those of you who don't know where Woodburn is. It's actually between Salem and Portland, right off of I-5. I mean, it's like right there. The sponsor of the bill is a representative from Portland, Travis Nelson. And he says this whole pricing thing at this gas station is a setup to take advantage of drivers who don't know what they're paying. And he's the guy that actually discovered this, apparently, because he stopped there to get gas a couple of weeks ago, and it was $6.88 a gallon. And he was just getting ready to pump his gas and said, essentially, what WTF is this? Now, opponents of this bill say the station itself is an outlier, that the signs are costly, actually, on average. The big ones, like you normally see, are about $50,000 to $60,000 a piece. And the other thing is municipalities, like Eugene, have been doing everything they can to try and limit signage for businesses. They also say, and this is fair, that people can actually get their prices or get gas prices on a number of different apps, like, for instance, I'll admit I use Gas Buddy, that they can get it on their phone and they don't need it. But still, one station in Woodburn, and everybody better have a damn sign. All right, there's your crazy Oregon news. Okay, Rick, it's time for you. Roll out a big old greasy drum of industrial real.